Erev Tov, everyone. In this week's parsha, discussing Yovel, so the Torah teaches us that all of the servants, slaves that the Jewish people had that were Jewish, automatically were freed on the Yovel, no matter how long they had been indentured. So if someone became a servant a year before the 49th year, he would go out in the 50th year. He wouldn't have to serve the 7 years. And this raises, we have this issue with Parshas Mishpatim as well, where the Torah tells us, Kisikna Evet Ivri, and the entire issue of having a human being as a chattel, as a slave, as someone that you own. Can you own another human being? So in the Torah, we have three types of situations. One is a situation of 7 years. And that occurs when a person was a thief and he had to make restitution, and he could not or did not wish to make restitution. So then he was sold, and the money that was obtained in the sale was used as restitution to the victim of the robbery. So that's v'nimkar b'gneivoso. And you're talking here about a Jewish thief. Then there is someone that... so
why 7 years?
Well, in the Torah, 7 years is an era.
It need not be. He stole $200 and he works off $200 in 1 year.
No. That has nothing to do with the value anymore. It has to do with the act.
So it's punitive.
It's either punitive or rehabilitative, depending on what the situation will be. Because we will see that it was common for the slave to say, because a Jewish slave was entitled to privileges that, so to speak, mitigated any negative aspects of his service. The Gemara says that if there was only one pillow in the house, so then the servant got the pillow. If there's only one steak for dinner, the servant gets the steak, etc. And there are people that whose nature is such that they don't want responsibilities. It's easier for them. There was a second type of someone that sold himself. That's the psychological situation that I've just described. He doesn't want to bear the responsibility of supporting himself. So these are cases of Eved Ivri, Jewish servants, Jewish slaves. They could not be physically maltreated. If they were physically abused, they went free. And the conditions of slavery were such that he was more of an indentured servant than he was of a physical slave. Now, for us, it is very hard to wrap our mind around the whole issue. We can't imagine such a society, even though we have lived in such a society. The Soviet Union had 30 million slaves. China has who knows how many tens of millions of slaves. But the concept of slavery, especially since the Western world has abandoned it for 150 years, England abandoned it first, even longer. The American Civil War was, to a certain extent, fought on that basis. So we find it very hard to adjust. What does the Torah want here? And Chazal said that economically it's not viable. Because if you have to live up to the costs of providing for the slave, he's not going to be very productive. It's like having your mother-in-law living with you. You're not going to make money on it. And the Gemara says, Misha kono eved le'atzmo, kono odom le'atzmo. A person that has a slave really has a master, because now you have the obligation of looking out for another human being. If the slave needs a doctor, you got to take him to the doctor. Whatever he needs, you have to provide. So therefore, in the Talmud already, the attitude towards slavery was not to accept it easily. There are halachas, and it was part of society. But in the exile, generally speaking, it no longer existed in Jewish society. Now, another type of a servant was a non-Jewish slave, an Eved Kanani. An Eved Kanani, v'avodo le'olam, that he did not go out in the Yovel. The master had the right to free him. We have a whole discussion in the Gemara Gittin regarding him. There was such a thing that was called a get shichrur, a document that freed the slave. Now the non-Jewish slave became a semi-Jew. If he was a male, you had to circumcise him. He was obligated in mitzvahs the way a woman was obligated in mitzvahs. You couldn't feed him non-kosher food. Even regarding Shabbat, he was limited. So it was like a transition between being non-Jewish and coming to be Jewish in terms of conversion. The Gemara tells us that in the house of the Nossi, Ram Gamliel, the house of Hillel, so since they were the Nisim, they were the leaders of the people, they had non-Jewish servants. But the Gemara tells us that Ram Gamliel mourned the Satshiva for the death of his non-Jewish servant Tevi because he said he was an Odom Kosher. He was an upright person, a person of notoriety. So it's a very delicate matter, very sophisticated matter. And it really, as a practical matter, it did not exist in most of Jewish society, but in both the First and Second Temple periods, the aristocrats of the Jewish people, the wealthier class, had such servants. And it was almost as much as a status symbol, as much as it was supposed to be an economic benefit, etc. Now we can understand, people of my years, so you need somebody to help you. So we don't have a slave today, but you have a few 100,000 non-Jewish helpers here in the country that are imported by the Israeli society in order to fill a need which somehow Jews themselves don't have the ability to fulfill. So these people are, to a certain extent, Eved Kanani without being an Eved Kanani, without the halachic restrictions, but the social status and the treatment falls under the general moral restrictions that we find in the Torah regarding an Eved Kanani. So they certainly cannot be physically mistreated. They cannot be financially exploited. And to a great extent, anyone who has the benefit of their services is not only grateful, but they prolong the lives of people. And in effect, the people experience what Chazal said, because you become reliant upon it. He's got to help you. Now, in Jewish history, there were periods of time when conquest occurred of other nations, and the people that were prisoners of war, that were taken into captivity, became forcibly converted to Judaism or retained their status as being an Eved Kanani. And the most flagrant incident was when the Hashmonaim conquered the area called Edom, which is in the Negev. There was a tribe of people there, the Idumeans, the Edomites, and they were forcibly converted. Out of that group, the Hashmonaim created a palace guard of elite soldiers that guarded the Hashmonaim were kings for 103 years. So they guarded the kings. They were the royal guard. eventually the royal guard took over the kingdom. Antipater, who was the head of the royal guard, he conspired with the Romans, and they got rid of the Chashmonaim. His son Herod killed out all of the Chashmonaim, including his wife and sons. And the Talmud always said that the rabbis held these people not to be Jewish. They held them, well, I shouldn't say not to be Jewish, to have the status of an Eved. There's Asara, Yuchsin, Olam, Bovel. There are 10 different levels of status, of pedigree in the Jewish world. One of them is an Eved. So as I mentioned before, he's partially Jewish because he has mitzvahs, but he is not considered fully Jewish. And we heard a lecture here, a very good one about the problems of Giur here in Eretz Yisrael. You take 200,000 people en masse and you make them Jewish, you're buying yourself a repeat story of the Idumeans, which did not turn out well. And no one speaks about it, but to me, that's the underlying issue here. It's not the formal conversion process. It's not which rabbis do it. That's only a cover story. The problem is, should it be done? Is it better to live in a country that has 200,000 non-Jews who are citizens and serve in the army and speak Hebrew? And don't drive on Yom Kippur? Or shall we try and make them fully Jewish, even though they will not be observant? And they will not conform to halacha. And then you will raise other problems of pedigree regarding their descendants, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. And so that's a very complicated issue. And I'm always amazed that that issue was never addressed publicly, because that is the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is that if we felt that it would be a benefit, there are numerous halachic methods to accomplish it. But if we feel that it is not a benefit, that it is only a problem that we're buying, so then we have great reticence, and we only want to deal with it in an individual case and not as a mass problem. So all of these issues are raised in this week's parsha. And the issues are raised, the answers are not necessarily that clear. But these are matters that we should consider. But part of the problem is that we have not been independent for 1,800 years. And now all of a sudden we are. Well, if for 1,800 years you didn't have to deal with the problem, it becomes difficult to deal with it suddenly and in an effective way after such a period of time. So the Parsha of Avodim, the Rambam has a special, one of the Sforim in the Yarach HaZoka, Hilchos Avodim. It appears everywhere. It's all a question, but the ramifications of it change from society to society, and certainly from what the Jewish people were, let's say even 100 years ago, and what they are today. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Rotza Kodesh Baruch Hu V'Zakot Yisrael V'Fichal Chirbo Lahem Torah and Mitzvot Shenemar Adonai Chafetz Aman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.